Hey, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. I get pretty darn excited when I find discover books that I have not seen before about the Civil War, primary source accounts, records of the Civil War veterans, of what they saw, what they experienced. Even more so is when those books contain references about the smells and the sounds. The truth is, description of what you see makes up a huge amount of what I find when I'm doing Civil War research. And all that's great. It's hugely important, and I wouldn't have it any other way. However, there are some authors that will describe the smell of something, or they'll describe the sound of something. Most often, that sound is the whiz, the bang of artillery or musket bullets as they're coming in. So you get some of that, but getting smells isn't quite the obvious choice for those who are writing about their experience. And so a couple weeks ago, when I was at a Civil War show, I picked up these two volumes of a book, and you can see it right here. These are really quite worn. And the title of the book is Andersonville, A Story of Rebel Prisons by John McElroy. These are the 1879 versions, and you can see it's a soft-bound book, which is a bit unusual for the 19th century, and it was published by a company called the National Tribune, of which McElroy was an editor. And the National Tribune documented all kinds of writings of Civil War soldiers. So I'm delighted to have these in my collection. I started going through the books and learning a little bit more about McElroy, and he's an interesting individual. So the story goes, he was particularly involved with the 16th Illinois Infantry, and in January 1864, during a skirmish in Jonesville, Virginia, he was captured along with a number of his comrades. Thus began a long journey to prisoner of war camps in the South, including, as the title of the book implies, Andersonville. So it's after the war when he writes about his experience, and inside is just chock full of description. He carefully must have kept notes in a diary from which he drew, including his own memory, and I'm sure also talking with other comrades who had similar experiences along the way. So the book has a particular moment in time where McElroy talks about his entrance into Charleston as they're being moved around. Charleston in 1864 has withstood all kinds of bombardments from the Union Navy, Union amphibious forces. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Morris Island, the attack by the 54th Massachusetts Infantry on Battery Wagner. The Confederate Army and the Confederate citizenry, they're withstanding all of this. And so here we are against the backdrop of Charleston. It's been partially burned out. It's been shelled regularly. One of those most famous batteries, the Union batteries that did the shelling, is the Swamp Angel. That huge, monstrous gun actually didn't fire for particularly long, but the battery in which the Swamp Angel was located was replaced by other guns. They kept up the bombardment for hundreds of days. And so it went on and on and on. The horrors of war in Charleston, the Union Army constantly beating down on the defenses of the city. And so this is what McElroy and his fellow prisoners of war come into in the late 1864. And so we're going to get to this passage here. Actually, it's about a page, and I want to read to you, where he talks about the arrival in Charleston. And this is where we get to the smell of war and the sounds from that Swamp Angel battery. So without further ado, let me read you this passage. Quote, "It was late at night when we reached Charleston. The lights of the city and the apparent warmth and comfort there cheered us up somewhat with the hopes that we might have some share in them. Leaving the train, we were marched some distance through well-lighted streets in which were plenty of people walking to and fro. There were many stores, apparently stocked with goods, and the citizens seemed to be going about their business very much as was the custom up north. At length, our head of column made a right turn, and we marched away from the lighted portion of the city to a part which I could not see through the shadows, or filled with ruins. An almost insupportable odor of gas, escaping, I suppose, from the ruptured pipes, mingled with the cold, rasping air from the sea to make every breath intensely disagreeable. I'm going to pause here. So there we have that reference to the smell. It's so rare when we have someone describing the smell. And here we are, the gas leaking from what McElroy suspects is a pipeline, mingling with the air, the salt air coming off of the harbor in the Atlantic Ocean. So now we're going to get into the sounds. As I saw the ruins, he says, it flashed upon me that this was the true burnt district of the city, and they were putting us under the fire of our own guns. At first, I felt much alarmed, little relish as I had on general principles. For being shot, I had much less been killed by our own men. Then, and he's talking here about the actual possibilities of being killed by cannon fire from Union guns across the harbor on Morris Island. Then I reflected that if they put me there and kept me, a guard would have to be placed around us who would necessarily be in as much danger as we were, and I knew I could stand any fire that a rebel could. We were halted in a vacant lot and sat down, only to jump up the next instant as someone shouted, "There comes one of them!" It was a great shell from the Swamp Angel battery. Starting from a point a mile away, where seemingly the sky comes down to the sea, was a narrow ribbon of fire, which slowly unrolled itself against the starlit vault over our heads. On it came, and it was apparently following the sky down to the horizon behind us. As it reached the zenith, there came to our ears a prolonged, but not sharp, wish, shish, 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 shish. We watched it breathlessly, and it seemed to be long minutes in running its course. Then a thump on the ground, and a vibration told that it had struck. For a moment, there was dead silence. Then came a loud roar and the crash of breaking timber and crushing walls. The shell had bursted. 10 minutes later, another shell followed with like results. For a while, we forgot all about the hunger and the excitement of watching the messengers from God's country. Wow, what a description of the combination of watching as the shells came from perhaps a mile or more away from the battery, those twirl of flashes of flames as it's coming through the sky, the way it lands, that thud, and then the moment of pause, the ground must have just had that shake, and then the explosion and the sounds associated with that. Really impressive stuff. And a little surprising to me, because when I began reading Andersonville, I wasn't expecting quite this journey. And I also have to say, McElroy is an impressive writer. So if you get a chance, go online and look up the book. You can find it easily. It's on Google Books. You don't need to have these volumes, these brittle volumes. You can find it. In fact, I'm going to put the link in the comments or in the caption information below. So there you have it. I'll leave it there for today. We'll see you next time on the trail.